everybody. This is not sort of a mystery happening here. This is a brief history of everything. I'm Chris. I am still your host. I'm still here, as always, with Thomas.
Hello.
We've been here the whole time, by the way. We just forgot to hit record.
Just been talking non-stop for about 6 months now.
Some of the quality of podcasts that you've missed out on. Like, the highest quality of podcasting. And we can't go back and do it again.
I'm still left wondering, can you podcast without having it being a podcast?
If a podcaster is sitting there and there's no microphone on, is it really a podcast?
Or it's just a conversation.
Don't. You're breaking my brain already. So thank you, everyone, for continuing to listen. We have been trying to get back to recording. I've been busy. I've got about 15 billion podcasts. Also work, which is that kind of that thing that gets in the way a little bit. But we've been really buoyed by the people still listening to the podcast. It's been really good. And we've had requests.
Oh, keep it coming.
Keep the requests coming in because it spurs us on to make sure that we actually do, keep recording. Because we do love it and we are enjoying it, but it's just a case of finding the time. So we've managed to find the time.
Found the time.
And we decided to go with, like, last episode, for those who have listened, in the archives, or on YouTube. We're now on YouTube. For those who have been listening, our last episode was a light and breezy topic of Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, that's right, it was.
It was a light and breezy Thatcherite discussion.
So inspiring.
It was wonderful. It was glorious. You turn if you want to, the podcast, not for turning. But today we've decided that we really wanted to go for cheerful.
Yeah, really uplifting, wells the heart, taps into those human emotions that you traditionally associate with, say, Disney or theme parks.
Exactly, and it's all about the rise of a bit like Disney, a street rat who rises up through his station. He don't like that. Will he be a poor boy? No, sirree. I'll sing more, but don't want a royalty. You'll find out there's so much more to Josef Stalin. So, Aladdin, Josef Stalin, have you ever seen them in the same room?
I can't say I have, actually.
Then there we go. Yeah. So we're dealing with the wonder that is Josef Stalin and his rise to power. And more importantly, just the period we're looking at from about 21 to 24, that little intermediate period, right through until, war. Good God, man, what is it good for?
For Stalin, absolutely everything.
Say it again. So it's all about restating his power and making him dominant from a position of street rat, as you sort of said. So let's get into it. So we'll start with his background. Now, Soviet-era history would have you think that he was a key contributor to the revolution.
Yeah.
That he was a driving force behind the revolution. Not quite the case.
No, far from it. Stalin's going to be one of those people where he's going to be divisive depending on your reading of history of him. For the most part, I think most people outside of the Russia bubble, which now apparently extends to Washington, D.C. as well, Stalin's just some sort of peasant guy, raised by a strict authoritarian father, loves his mother, which seems to be this common story of that era. It's the same with, say, Napoleon, it's the same with Stalin, it's the same with Hitler. All these, lunatic power grabbers have a problem with their father.
And the mummy's boys.
Love their mother, and probably aren't too well off in their childhood, so they seek refuge in some sort of creative arts, of which I'm going to lump religion in with there.
Yes.
So Stalin's sort of main patron becomes one of his religious figures as a child, and he's sort of groomed to become a priest or a figure in the Russian Orthodox Church. Starts to take for it, but doesn't really take for it, and then runs off into the wilderness to become a bandit.
You can almost argue that it is a really big foretelling of the flexibility that would become a trait of Stalin, is that this idea of he's going to become a Russian Orthodox priest, he's this devout guy, except not really, that's more circumstantial. And what he really wants to do is go and steal from people. Again, the Aladdin comparison continues. and he goes off, and he's sort of the Mr. Fix-It on the streets.
Yeah.
And he's a bit of a thug, he's a bit of a thief, and...
He's also very handsome. I will give him that.
The ladies fawn.
He could be walking straight out of Newtown. Straight away.
The ladies fawned over young Joseph. And he was a very popular figure within the startings of the Bolsheviks and the communists and that whole era. And more importantly... he's useful.
Very useful.
And this is when you are an upstart sort of, we'll say political movement, but at the time more just a workers' sort of movement. You need someone who's not afraid to step outside of laws. You need someone who's not afraid to just go and do what needs to be done.
Yeah, in the Russian Revolution of 1917, there's even though they talk about like a classless society, I think intellectually there's two classes within the revolution movement. There's the people on the ground, the working class, but then there's like this idealistic class, Lenin and Trotsky, the people who deal with the big broad ideas and the idealism of communism and the big broad stroke plans that they've got going on. Then there's the working class who are doing the sort of things on the ground, but there's no one really bridging that. There's no one with any sort of political nous. Remember, the Tsar has kept like an iron fist over Russia at this point, and so within the revolutionary movement, there's not many people with any sort of great experience at doing anything other than giving big, lofty speeches or working in factories. And here comes Stalin, who has some clue, not necessarily on the day-to-day management of a government, but he's got a brain for organisation and for planning and for structuring, and he can see things in a sort of semi-idealistic way, but also realistic way.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You often hear people talk about street smarts and book smarts. And if you look at this period into 1917 and the return of Lenin and things like that, which, by the way, was funded by the Germans who really wanted Russia out of the war. But if you look at that situation, like Lenin comes back the first time, it's a bit too soon, goes away again for a little bit, Trotsky's arrested, the others are all arrested, not Stalin. They're
seen as such a two-bit player. They
don't even bother to arrest him. So he's out on the streets still mobilising people. Trotsky is let out of prison as part of this big deal that they're working out to bring Lenin back in. And the second he's out of prison, the first thing that happens is Trotsky and Lenin get in contact, and Lenin's like, "Start, we're going now." So Trotsky is left to organise, but Trotsky hasn't been out. So they use Stalin a lot, and a lot of other guys. But Stalin is on the street sort of actively mobilising stuff. He's not a major player, but he's active and he's visible. Yeah, and he's visible in particular to Lenin, who, as you said before, a lot of these people made grand, lofty speeches. Now, those who know anything about the revolution know that when Lenin comes back, the Bolshevik Party is not expecting him to say, "We are now going to seize power." And he comes back and he says it, and the Bolshevik Party goes, "What? No, we're not even remotely ready." And his solution is, figure it out. That's what people like Stalin were there for, was how are we going to, even though we are still a minority, how the hell are we going to do this? And him on the street being that canny, smart, not book smart, but street smart, was able to manipulate situations that really sort of drew him to the attention of Lenin.
But that's at the same time, and I completely agree with that, at the same time, it's not to take away from Stalin's own idealism here. I think it's very easy to sort of take Stalin and say he's just an evil person motivated by evil means. I think that sort of simplifies him, because he's a great contributor to communist thought, and he sees himself, once Lenin dies, he says he's the third iteration of communism. It's Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist thought. So he does have the big ideas, and he does have the theory and the base of knowledge of communism, but what he's not good at is espousing that in any great meaningful way. What he's very good at is those street smarts, who to put into right positions. He can read people and see their strengths and weaknesses or their potentiality, and they go and he can sort of figure out the best way to structure and move forward is by doing this, that, and the other, and enacting other people's grander visions rather than being another visionary himself.
So sort of all the way through this early phase and the establishment and the consolidation of power, he features not as a prime driver. He features as basically chief bureaucrat. He's the guy putting in the long hours. He's the guy basically managing the party itself, because Lenin and Trotsky in particular are really big picture people. And Trotsky mainly is this driving, we want global communism, we want permanent revolution. Trotsky is always the grand idealist of the party, and he's always seen as that. which I always think personally undercuts some of Trotsky's, again, the Red Army and those sorts of things, and he was the prime organiser. But it was very easy for Trotsky to sort of get distracted from what he was doing and move on to these grand ideals instead, and everything he did was for a grand ideal. Stalin is the day-to-day contact.
Yeah.
And what happens is you get, especially after the Civil War, you get this big drive. It's referred to as the Lenin drive of membership. And the Lenin drove the membership, but Stalin was the organiser on the ground who dealt with everybody. So when you came into the party, you were dealing directly with Stalin.
Yeah, Stalin by 1924 has become the secretary of the Communist Party, which is the job no one wants. On the Politburo, which is like essentially the 7-person, 8-person team who's running everything. He's got the job no one wants. Trotsky's the Commissar for War, and even though they've withdrawn themselves from war in World War One straight away, and then World War One itself comes to an end, the war is no longer over, especially for Trotsky. He believes in the permanent revolution, that the whole world needs to get on board with this communist revolution, and essentially the war is not a war against a nation, but it's a war against capitalism. The Commissar for War there has a much bigger job of trying to direct foreign policy as much as anything else. But here's Stalin filling out index cards for members and writing down people's addresses, which is going to come in handy later. He's doing the paperwork and the filing, and he's building up a bureaucracy where one never existed in Tsarist Russia. And
when the Soviets are when all the individual Soviets start thinking about rebelling against the ideas, it's Stalin who is dispatched to deal with the Soviets. So he's the guy, he's boots on the ground. Yeah,
he's going to these places and putting people into positions where he can go, oh, you'll owe me later, with a wink and a nudge, or, well, this person might end up overthrowing or rising up, or this guy's got delusions of grandeur. We better not put him into a position of power and authority. So he's really meshing himself in there while no one else sees it, because everyone else is distracted with something else.
It's the quote which I love is from the historian John Laver, who argues, by 1922 Stalin was already the most powerful man in the Soviet Union, although nobody, possibly even Stalin himself, realised it at the time. And it's very true. Like, Stalin is the guy who is running the party while everyone else is off doing other things. It also plays in a little bit, and we're going to get into it in a bit more detail shortly, but Trotsky, I think, just expected that after Lenin, the party was his. He had always been seen as that shadowing figure of Lenin in many ways, even though he wasn't a Bolshevik from day one. And I think that also plays... That's something that Stalin is able to use those street smarts to manipulate people's undercurrent of not fear of Trotsky, but just a distrust.
Yeah, it's as much ideological as it is personal with these two.
Oh, yeah.
And Trotsky, as I say, permanent revolution. The revolution shouldn't end in Russia. It should split and continue on. His next target was essentially Germany, and post-World War One era seemed ripe, and if they had really focused on it, there was a pretty good chance it could have happened. And then from there, maybe Russia would go from Germany to France or Great Britain. All this weakened Europe with post-World War One. Years of toil and hardship for all those ex-soldiers and the home fronts. Trotsky's focused on spreading communism, whereas Stalin wants to just keep it in Russia. Socialism, one nation at a time. And Stalin essentially is able to use that sort of appeal to win over more supporters, because who wants to continue fighting? You've just done 4 years of World War One. You've then essentially been invaded by foreign powers as well. Great Britain and France and the United States send auxiliary support to people who are opposing the Bolsheviks in Russia. And so consequently, Stalin's offering this sort of break, or this return to normalcy, as opposed to, well, let's keep fighting. And it's that enthusiasm for fighting that probably loses Trotsky a lot of supporters. Trotsky just wants to keep going and going and going, whereas Stalin's almost saying, look, let's stop and take a breather.
Well, it's Isaac Deutscher says that it's the very name of Trotsky's theory, permanent revolution. Sounds like an ominous warning to a tired generation that it should expect no peace and quiet in its lifetime. And again, go way back, follow the lineage, follow the earlier revolutions, follow the Tsar's reaction with Bloody Sunday, go all the way back there. Russia has basically been in turmoil since, if you look at it, it's about the 1890s. We'll go back to the Sino-Russian War.
Yeah.
Their war with Japan, which is the thing that sort of propels them into World War One because it's the loss of prestige. So from the war with Japan, they've basically been at war all of this time, either internally or externally. And the Russian population is over it by this point. The slogan that the Bolsheviks were able to use to get into power, bread, land and peace.
Yeah.
The peace bit's sounding really good right now.
Yeah.
And, again, Lenin's view on all of this, remember when they signed the treaty to get out of the war, Trotsky wants to keep negotiating and wants to come up with a deal that's going to be fair and they're not going to have to give up a lot of things because he's looking at it going, Germany's going to be weak. We can probably get out of this quite well. And Lenin's response is, I don't care what we pay. I just want out of the war. And they surrender huge amounts of territory, which is seen as being a massive weakness of Russia. But in effect, just reinforces this idea of, we'd like to stop fighting now. We really just want time to consolidate. We'll do what it takes. Trotsky is, in that way, against the wishes of Lenin, who just wants war to end.
Yeah.
And Stalin, I think, seizes that and goes, right, I can be the peacemaker here, and I can just sort of go, look, we don't care about what the rest of you are doing. We just want to live. And I think he spots something that Trotsky is too broad to see. I think E.H. Carr puts it best when he says the elite party of Lenin is now becoming the mass party of Stalin.
Yeah. He's obviously got more of an appeal than Trotsky. And given the actions that he'll go through that we'll talk about in a minute, given that he gets nominal support and he's able to embed his cult of personality in the population, yes, through fear and terror, but also through genuine admiration from a lot of the Russian people, it's not much of a surprise that probably his rhetoric of let's just stop and focus on ourselves for a little while, that people will flock to him in some degree because it's a more optimistic future than, well, let's keep fighting. I mean, you've got a society which is 90% peasantry who are struggling and living on a very sort of minimal diet, minimal life, no luxury, no income of any great description. You've got a whole bunch of people who've never known what it is for freedom and for life and for liberty. Well, if they even get liberty. But you've got an oppressed population who's now finally thinking they're not oppressed. It's not a surprise that they want to stop fighting.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go into the how the hell he gets from this position into the position of power. As we said, he's the bureaucrat. He's the guy aligning all the party internally. He's the guy doing the work. He's doing the long hours, which nobody in their right mind actually wanted to do. He also presents himself as just being Lenin's worker. He is just there to do the work of Lenin. He starts to sort of argue that he's not ambitious. He just wants to push Lenin's agenda, and that's all he ever wants. Now, historians all agree that is simply a ploy. But it's effective, and it's useful, and it's a counterpunch, as we said, to Trotsky, who is quite clearly ambitious and sees his future as being, once Lenin is gone, I am going to take this party in a new direction.
Yeah.
And he is openly talking about it, whereas Stalin is just the quiet worker going, yep, we can do this.
I think he's also learned something from Trotsky's own issues. Trotsky's got no friends.
No.
Like, he's alienated everyone. People call him arrogant, self-centered, entitled.
Which is, yes.
Yeah, and all of that is largely true. And not even a rewriting under Stalin. He didn't need to edit any of that.
He also plays into the, and it is worthwhile noting here, he plays into the anti-Semitism too.
Yes.
Because Trotsky, of course, is from Jewish background.
Yeah.
And the Jewish people were not very popular in most of Europe at this time.
Most of Europe.
But especially in Russia, there's a distrust of...
pogroms.
Yeah, there's a distrust of the Jewish people, the pogroms that had happened, obviously.
Now, seeing how ineffective you can become in alienating people, I think Stalin at this point doesn't want to exceed his own reputation. People look at him and go, he's not a threat. At best, he's competent. Put a piece of paper in front of him, he'll fill it out like no one else. But, he's a bit, simple, and let's leave Stalin to do the easy jobs. And I think he wants to... his actions try to confirm that. so that no one sees him as a threat. The only thing is Lenin, who understands Stalin better than anyone else, and that will come out much later.
So he puts himself into this position of power. Now, at this stage, there's no real worry because Lenin's still there.
Yeah.
Lenin is the driving force, and nobody can rival Lenin. That is the thing that needs to be really stated here. The reason why the succession for Lenin wasn't really planned out is because nobody could match what Lenin was to the party. And I mean, Stalin then uses this later on to create the cult of Lenin, which is designed to then allow the cult of Stalin to continue because he deifies Lenin, which, by the way, Lenin would have absolutely hated.
Yeah.
And he sort of makes it quite clear. But then we have a series of health concerns for Lenin, and he has a minor illness first of all, then he has a minor stroke, then he has a major stroke, and he's really not well. And at this time, the party is just carrying on, and at this stage, this is where Trotsky is still the face and the voice on behalf of Lenin. But the work is now all being carried out by Stalin with no Lenin there on a daily basis to check in and go, what's going on? In fact, the opposite is true, because Lenin's private secretary is Stalin's wife. Now, what is happening at this time, unbeknownst to Lenin early on, although by the end he sort of figures it out, is that she is passing on information to her husband. She is, for example, there's a couple of times where there were phone calls that were made that quite clearly the phone was off the hook at the other end, and there's a lot of recounting stories talking about the fact that basically they were listening in on everything that Lenin said and everything that Lenin did. So at this stage, Stalin is behind the scenes, low-key planning what is going to happen when Lenin goes. Also, because she is around Lenin all the time, she knows what his health condition is like. And so where everyone else is like, no, he'll be fine. No, he'll be fine. She is basically able to say to her husband, he's not fine.
And you might want to start thinking about
you might want to work your power base out. So, two things happen roughly around the same time. Stalin starts to reorganize the party. After one of the party congresses, he starts to realign the party in terms of we need this to work more effectively and efficiently. That sounds great. Stalin is the person appointing people to those positions. And Stalin basically appoints all of his friends and all of the people who have been influential with him on the way up and who trust him and who think he's great. And everybody within the party that moves into a position is a Stalin ally. Now, Trotsky's not the bureaucrat, so he doesn't pay any attention to this.
No, what's the point of this?
Okay, fine, they're going to do all the paper-pushing jobs. Good for them.
Yeah, it means I don't have to.
What does this mean? And Lenin, of course, is too busy, to be honest, trying to breathe. Sounds sick, but it's true. He's too busy trying to breathe.
He's in the process of dying.
He is in the process of dying. Now, he writes a letter to sort of start to lay out the idea of what's going to happen with the succession. So, in January of 1923, he writes... Now, I'm going to paraphrase part of this because it is very important to what happens next. So, he writes, Comrade Stalin, having become secretary, has unlimited authority and concentrated in his hands, and I am not sure whether he will always be capable of using that authority with sufficient caution. Comrade Trotsky, on the other hand, is distinguished not only by his outstanding ability, he is personally perhaps the most capable man in the present Central Committee, but he has displayed excessive self-assurance and shown excessive preoccupation with the purely administrative side of his work. So what he writes there is, he's got unlimited authority and I'm not quite sure he's able to use it in the best way. But while he says that Trotsky is distinguished, he basically says, but he's an arrogant prick. And he doesn't always get it right. So he's not really pushing either of them, but it's more of a backhander there to Stalin.
Yeah, later in the same letter.
So this is the 10 days later.
Yeah,
he wrote an addendum.
23.
Yep.
He says Stalin is too rude, and this defect is intolerable in a secretary general, which is essentially Lenin's job. That is why I suggest that comrades think about a way of removing Stalin from his post and appointing another man in his stead who is more tolerant, more loyal, more polite, and more considerate to his comrades, less capricious, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah. That's 10 days after he wrote the first bit. So the first bit he's already hedging, and the second bit he's no longer hedging.
Yeah,
he's a prick. And there were a couple of times where apparently he was very, especially to Lenin's wife and to Lenin's family, he was very rude. He used to dismiss people out of hand. It was also after he went to one of the Soviets, and the way that he dealt with the issue was basically the threat to throw everybody out of the party. And all these reports got back to Lenin, and Lenin's like, we can't do this. We've got to deal with it. So he wrote this letter, obviously, in January of 1923. And you can see from that point that you're like, okay, so we're going to move against him now. We're going to make this happen. There is absolutely no way that this doesn't happen. A year later, he's dead.
Yep. And
he dictates the testament and has another massive stroke. And is basically useless for the next year until he dies. He's there, and they wheel his chair out, literally wheel the chair out to take some photos to show that the comrade Lenin is alive, but he's no longer in charge. Lenin dies.
Mm-hmm. Now, in one way to start to overcome the negative publicity that's going to come out, he knows about the testament, he knows about the recommendations that are going to come. So Stalin is able to get on the offensive. Thankfully, or maybe not.
One of the elements is luck.
Yeah, luckily, that's the better one. Luckily, he's able to get on the front foot before anyone else because he has all this inside information. And so straight away he starts prepping this big, elaborate funeral against Lenin's own wishes, where he said, I just want a humble, common funeral. No, Stalin is he's going to town. He is going all out. He gets the street parades, he gets the military out, he gets the pallbearers, the weeping widows on the sides. He gets everything going because he knows he needs to try and undercut the reputation that he's a disloyal, uncaring SOB that Lenin's going to say he is.
And far more importantly, the other members of the party know as well. They know what's in the letter. They know that basically what Lenin said was not him. And so there is a lot of talk that at the funeral that the party's going to basically uncover the letter and go, this is the situation, and let the Russian people know. And chief among these is Trotsky. Now, this you would think would be where Trotsky is going to step up, and Trotsky is about to become the leader of the Soviet Union. Except we mentioned that thing of luck. Trotsky had gone back home and got sick. And he was ill for about 10 to 11 days. He was not well, couldn't get out of bed. Stalin sends a message to Trotsky and goes, look, comrade, we're going to be burying him. Obviously, he wants this simple funeral. We're going to bury him, soon. You're not going to make it back for the funeral. So just, you heal up. We need you to lead us. Mm-hmm. You heal up. Don't bother coming back for the funeral. We'll see you whenever you're good. And Trotsky goes, okay, and stays home. The funeral is in a future 10 days after he dies. It's not instant. He could quite easily have made it back for the funeral. But by not attending, Stalin gets control of it. And this is his moment, and this is his propaganda moment. And he basically then, at the funeral, stands up and presents himself as the next phase.
The logical successor.
And this is it. He starts talking about how much he loves Comrade Lenin, and as you pointed out, basically sort of starts indicating, I am a continuation of what Comrade Lenin wanted. And starts to, and reaffirms all this loyalty, comes up with a loyalty oath to Lenin, basically remodels this cult of Lenin, and then goes, and I am the man to continue the cult of Lenin. He's a pallbearer at the funeral, he's carrying the coffin, he's the man weeping up there while he gives the speech, he's the guy, he's the grieving member of the party. And it's always pointed out by Stalin's supporters, where's Trotsky?
Yeah, why isn't he here?
Where's Trotsky? Why is Comrade Trotsky not here? What is he doing? So this is where Trotsky makes his big misstep, and it is a huge misstep to not come back for that funeral. So then you end up with this leadership struggle starting. Now, a lot of people think, leadership struggle, it's over quickly. This takes time, right? The way that it's portrayed through history is that it was a quick thing and then he loses out straight away and it's over. Well, Trotsky does lose out pretty quickly, but he doesn't go away.
No, he hangs around like a disease.
He's still there because Stalin finds it very difficult early on to get rid of him. Because how do you get rid of him? You've got to establish your power base first. So one of the ways that he's able to get control is, as you said before, Trotsky is not a Bolshevik from day one. He's Menshevik. So his belief is that, for example, you need to have a democratic system first, then communism can replace the democratic system, which was not Lenin's view really, and it was not Stalin's view at all. So there was a distrust of him as a Menshevik for a start. Secondly, as the commander of the Red Army, lots of people were worried that Trotsky could potentially be something along the lines of a Napoleon. This is the guy with the army in his back pocket. Do we really want a leader with the army in his back pocket? You know who the last leader was who had the army in his pocket? It was the Tsar.
Yeah.
Everyone remember what happened with the Tsar? So you've got a situation where Trotsky is mistrusted. So what you've got is there are really sort of 4 to 5 people at this point in time who are in contention for the leadership. Stalin, obviously. Trotsky, obviously. Zinoviev is another one. And Zinoviev is an up-and-coming member in terms of the party. So is Kamenev is there as well, and so is Bukharin. So there's 5, realistically. There are more than that, but the 5 who had any real say in this is Zinoviev, Bukharin, Kamenev, Stalin, and Trotsky. They're the ones. Now, the way that this sort of gets set up is that Trotsky is the guy who is going to be the guy in everyone's mind except for Stalin's and his friends. Zinoviev is going to run the collectives. And Zinoviev goes, well, if I have the collectives, then I will have control of Russia because I'm actually... He's trying something very similar, in effect, to what Stalin does with the base of the party. Stalin's like, if I control the base of the party, I control Russia.
Yeah.
Zinoviev is, if I control the collectives, then I'm controlling the industrialisation and the means of production. I'm controlling. And Bukharin is sort of more the attack dog for Stalin, who's go out and attack Trotsky for me. And Bukharin is the loyal servant, right up until the point that he dies, which we'll come to a bit later.
He's in charge of press and propaganda.
Yep.
Through the revolution under Lenin and then later under Stalin. So he's got the ear of the masses pretty well tuned. So anyone who wasn't already listening to Stalin's message, because maybe they've turned off Stalin, are listening to the voice of the party, who is actually Stalin anyway. Now
when you get to the Congress, because it all sort of boils down to the 1924 Congress. At the 1924 Congress, the testament is read out. But it is read out by Zinoviev. Now, before this is read out, Stalin goes to Kamenev and Zinoviev in particular and sort of says to them, look, none of us like Trotsky, right? You don't like him and you don't like him. And this is where this not being popular thing does actually matter. Because you think, it's not about popularity, it's about who can run. No, it's about popularity. So Stalin turns around to Zinoviev and Kamenev and goes, we all dislike him. So what we're going to do is we will run this. Remember, this is communism. This is we can run together. So we can each manage a different element. We don't need to put Trotsky in a position of power here. If the 3 of us band together, we can get rid of him. So Zinoviev is in charge of reading out the testament, and he reads it out, including, except for the last bit where he's really savage against Stalin, the bit where he worries about Stalin's concentration of power. But what happens is he throws a little addendum on the end of it where he says, what Comrade Lenin has said, however, has not happened. It has not taken place. And in effect, Comrade Stalin is the future and is following Lenin. Now, the problem for Trotsky is at this point he realises he's been outmanoeuvred. If you're Trotsky, what options really do you have left? Because the answer is none, right? The second that statement is read out, and you know what's there, and it's read out, but it's not read out in a way that is popular to you, but in fact goes, yeah, no, it didn't happen. If you're Trotsky, you're done. At this point, you are finished. So Trotsky sort of keeps quiet. There's nothing he can do, but he knows by 1924 that Stalin's got the party.
Yeah, the three Stalinist two lackeys just keep voting down everything that Trotsky throws up. They mass coordinate like real solid PR campaigns. They get their supporters to actively boo Trotsky when he talks and to boo his supporters when they give speeches as well. And it's all in an effort to just make Trotsky more unpopular than Stalin, who knows he's going to be unpopular with the sort of hardcore Leninists who go, oh, well, I'm going to listen to Lenin no matter what. But at least I'm not. Trotsky is essentially going to be his retort. And his ideas have just fallen on so many deaf ears by now. Trotsky, with his permanent revolution, through the Comintern, had sent money and assistance to Germany and to France and to England to try and incite a communist revolution in all those countries, thus permanent revolution, and it had failed one after another, and if anything, it had only strengthened the democracies.
Yep.
And so a lot of the Russian bureaucracy are going, well, why would we support this Trotsky guy? All his ideas keep failing, and so he loses votes, he loses supporters, and so he just hangs around in the hopes that maybe something will change for him, and it's going nowhere.
The best way I can sort of put it for people who don't really have a grasp on this era, and to bring it back to a popular culture reference, and it's not the same level, not the stupidity of a Homer Simpson, but to use a Simpsons analogy here, it's almost like Trotsky is Lisa, standing up and going, we have to keep suffering, it will be horrible, but the reward at the end will be wonderful, but we're going to need to suffer and be terrible. And then Stalin, like Homer, stands up and goes, peace for everybody! And everyone just carries him shoulder high from the building while Trotsky's standing there going, but revolution! But revolution, it's very much like that. If you are telling these people there's uncertainty, bloodshed and war, and Stalin is going wealth and peace and security, you're not listening to the guy who's going, I just want you to suffer for an untold amount of time for no determinable reward, but we know there'll be something.
So that's the lofty idealism of Marxism, though. You're not thinking about yourself in a moment or even your lifetime. You're talking about the bent of history, and you're talking about generations unforeseen in the future being better off as a result of your suffering. And that's where Trotsky loses the mass appeal. That just sounds like someone speaking from a lofty, privileged position saying, well, yes, you peasants, you need to suffer because peasants in the future will be better off. But and then the peasants look up at him on his high horse and go, yeah, but you're not starving today.
No.
You're not.
You're fine.
Your children are alive. I've just lost 3 this year. It's this disconnect between the low and the high that allows Stalin to then get down with the low and say, no, I'm with you.
Yeah, look where I came from. Look at me. I was a humble member of the Communist Party. He doesn't ever say street criminal. He just says I was a humble worker. That's what he talks about. That's what he reinforces. Now, he does win the ideological battle, and he wins it by being pragmatic. Yeah. He wins the idea of, look, we need to just worry about us, as you said, because we've been throwing money overseas. That's not worked. Yeah. And who's squandering our resources? It's Trotsky. So let's not do that. But let's not forget as well that because he's General Secretary of the party, there's a fair amount of bribery. There's a fair amount of who wrote all the files? That would be Stalin. Who has access to all the files? That would be Stalin. Who can blackmail people with those files? That again, Josef Stalin. And this is political nous. And we're talking about real politics. We're not talking about the high ideals of the Communist Party and things like that. We're talking about political nous day to day. And that is what Stalin was able to do that Trotsky just could not. Because Trotsky didn't muddy himself with the day-to-day affairs. No. As you said, for him there was a higher calling. That he saw a higher calling. But you need to have control to do that. You can't just go, I want everything, I want to give everyone a pony. Well, do you have a farm? No, I don't. Well, how exactly are you giving them the pony if you don't have the farm? Right? What Stalin gets, literally, is the farm. Yeah. Like, literally he gets the farm. So he also could do things as well, like, he was in charge at one point of putting the congressional delegates in. So, like, when he stacks the 13th Congress in May of 24, when they read that out and go, but that hasn't happened, the reason why the Congress goes, yeah, is because all the members have been picked by Stalin, and they all know what to do when that gets read out. They all know to support Stalin. It is like Trotsky is the most unwelcome person at the birthday party.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the guy you had to invite. He's the third cousin. He's got to be there. You see him once a year. You know, don't really like him, but you just turn up to his party. You can learn to turn up to the party, but you don't do like anything with it. So by that point, the power struggle is really over.
Yeah, by 25, he's been dismissed from his position, and then 2 years later, he's expelled completely.
Yeah, like again, his what he sort of does in 25 is just sort of sits there and stews. Like he gets thrown out in 25 from all of his posts, but they can't kick him out yet completely. They have to keep him around still because you're still in this, you know, we're not going to wipe everybody out yet. He hasn't got that far. It's coming, but not quite yet. And it's not until October of 26 that he's completely expelled from the Politburo. With, by the way, Zinoviev and Kamenev, who both Zinoviev and Kamenev, who are the ones who he goes, we're going to rule together. And they go, yep. And that never happens. They're very quickly sort of isolated. Like Zinoviev, by 25, starts to work out that he's in a bit of trouble. And by the end of 25, he starts attacking, but he doesn't attack Stalin. He attacks Bukharin. But he's attacking Bukharin because that's, while not safe, it's a lot safer than directly attacking Stalin.
Oh, yeah.
You go after Bukharin and see if you can get a bit of Bukharin. And at this point, Kamenev and Zinoviev go, right, we're out. And they're all expelled from the Politburo. And then, it would end quite badly for all of them in the 1930s.
Yeah.
1930s are not a good era for anybody who challenges. So he gets control. But what is the Russia that he's got control of?
Oh, Plebville.
Yeah, Plebville. It's probably a good way to describe it. In fact, they probably should have renamed the country Plebville at this point in time. The main policy that has been sort of put in there was the NEP, right? The new economic policy. Off the back of war communism.
Yeah.
Both Lenin policies. War communism is basically he takes control, the Civil War happens, and Lenin goes, right, hardcore communism so we can win this war.
It's insane. It's the thing that always stands out to me is if you had a business with more than 10 employees, you were nationalised.
Yep.
I can't think of a business that doesn't have 10 employees.
Exactly.
Even the Ma and Pa store on the corner has Ma and Pa and probably the family working on the back, out the back stocking shelves. Like, there's every chance your business, your everything was nationalised. And war communism is hardcore communism.
And one of the things that I find fascinating about it is that Trotsky, who we've talked about, is sort of like not the one who deals with the minutiae and day to day. Trotsky is the one who says at the end of war communism, who turns around to Lenin and goes, if we're not careful, they're going to revolt against us, right? You know what happened with, like, the Tsar, and remember how the Tsar was unpopular for losing touch and, like, just pushing ahead with... Yeah, we're doing that right now. And so you get a situation where Trotsky's like, we've gone too far. Yeah, we've gone too far. We need to back this off. The NEP, the new economic policy, is the solution. Now, I personally, whenever we talk about the NEP, my personal argument about the NEP is... I feel like the NEP was a really good way to maintain the nuts and bolts and the institutions of what would be the communist system, but just tweak it a bit to give people what they wanted.
Yeah, it was transitionary.
So what happens is you've still got the idea of this. They've still got the idea of the farms are going to sort of semi-collectivise, although not to the level of what Stalin would do. And you're still producing the grain for the party, and you're still producing. The difference is the NEP allows you to have the ability to sell excess, right? So it allows you to still make some money. It allows you to still keep some control over private business. It's also designed on a broader scale to allow Russia to start trading with other countries again, because other countries, funnily enough, when you leave the war they're all fighting, they get a bit pissed off.
They don't want to talk to you.
So Lenin's like, we need to trade with other countries. If we want to industrialise, and that is the goal, we need to deal with these other countries. So the NEP allows them to sell grain overseas. It allows for foreign trade. Things which, again, none of these things are like communist in their nature. But what they are is essential. It is a pragmatic policy for a pragmatic time. And it allows for Russia to start building their wealth again, which they haven't had for
ever.
Generations, really. The Tsars controlled an amount of wealth, but the people have never had wealth. So you start seeing people are allowed to sell excess grain, so people are feeling a lot better about themselves. The tension sort of, it pops the balloon of tension. And basically allows for the final part of consolidation of the Bolsheviks and allows them to go, right, the Civil War is over, breathe. We've got resources, we're stocking up on food. What we're also doing with the NEP is encouraging people to maybe start looking at factories because we don't need all of you to do this anymore, and factory work's going to pay you quite well. So the NEP is a policy that is capitalist really in nature, but the bare bones of what is going to become the communist system are there.
For me, the NEP undoes the damage of war communism.
Yep.
War communism advocates another extremist element of it is that they want to get rid of money.
Yep.
Like no cash, guys. We're going back to the barter system or the equity trades that you put in and you take out whatever you put in. War communism destroys the Russian economy to the point where if you measure the pre-World War I economy of Russia to the post-World War I in 1922, the economy is like operating at half its capacity. So then the NEP comes along and gets it back to the pre-war levels.
Well, it starts to think about it. It doesn't quite reach pre-war levels, but it does get them back past like post-revolution level.
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm getting at there. So it's never going to get back to fully. Well, it's getting back at sort of parity.
12 million before the war, 3 to 4 million. So they're actually coming back out of it. Not close to that, but better than like they were trading in like nothing during the communist eras. So you get that situation where they are starting to they're building that grain back up to where they should be.
Yeah, so in terms of grain, they're like still 8 millions of tons off. You would expect that if you've just given away a cubical boatload of your territory to the Germans.
You could have said the other word, it would have been fine. And when you've just given up all the farming territory, that's a problem.
But you're somehow managing to export more cows.
Isn't that amazing how that works?
Yeah, cows are on the up. I think the pigs are also on the up. Coal's not anywhere near their output, which is a pretty big concern.
Well, the problem, and this is the other thing where this is one of the reasons why industrialisation is required.
This is where industrialisation gets a steroid boost.
Is because Russia has a lot of resources that are quite worth a lot of money, but they have absolutely no ability to get them.
Yeah, like where Britain, France, America, Japan, Italy, Spain, Austro-Hungarians, I think I'm running out of places now, where they've all industrialised 100 years earlier, Russia has not. No.
And there's a great quote when Stalin was was talking about what he needed to do, and the reason why we're about to get to the policy of industrialisation. And when Stalin sells this idea of industrialisation, his quote is, "We are 50 or 100 years behind the advanced countries. We must make good this distance in 10 years. Either we do it, or they will crush us."
Which is probably a fair assessment.
Yeah, and that was the thing. He was always suspicious of foreign powers, but the main reason he was suspicious of foreign powers was because he knew of their wealth, and he knew that they had these resources that at any time they wanted to, they could just turn around and go like that and crush the Soviet Union. What Stalin does is, after 25, he basically makes treaties with every country he can think of. Now, none of these are because he likes these countries. These are all just basically preventative measures to stop this idea of future conflict and future war. I mean, they signed a treaty with Germany where he sort of goes...
It's one of the first ones.
Yeah, where basically there's the first one there is if anyone threatens to invade sovereignty of the countries, the other is okay with helping out. This is the idea of sort of, look, we're fine with Germany again now, we're all good, we don't want to harm you. He does deals with Britain, he does deals with France. He starts doing deals with everyone, but none of them really mean anything in terms of friendship. They just mean, we're not ready to fight anybody yet, and we just want to focus on us.
Yeah, I think it's Russia giving up a lot, at least in terms of like face in signing these, because The rest of the nations still largely don't want anything to do with Russia. They're excluded from the League of Nations still, along with Germany. They're not recognised in any sort of great capacity, and so, except for Germany, that's the only treaty that actually has some sort of teeth, because with Gustav Stresemann, who organises the signing of that treaty, it allows Germany to re-emerge into the global community and get some respect. But also there's some real sneaky clauses where Germany can get around the Treaty of Versailles and train their military in Russia and use their officer schools and their academies to train their troops and come back, because they're banned under the Treaty of Versailles from having them. So that's probably the only alliance that's really meaningful that Russia can sort of form at this time, which is ironic.
It is kind of ironic. So the NEP is doing what it needs to do, but Stalin, as you can see there, still goes, well, we're not really anywhere near where we need to be.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
So what he requires is two things. He needs for the farms to become more effective and efficient, and he also needs this rapid industrialisation. Now, the way that he decides to do it is through the idea of collectivisation, leading to the process of industrialisation. So what he's going to do is basically turns around to the peasant communities and goes, all these farms,
one big one,
we're going to join them together. Right? Now, what we're going to do for you, though, is we're going to give you tractors. So we're going to have tractor stations. And whereas there might have been 5 small farms, congratulations, you're now one big farm, and we're going to give you some tractors. 2 tractors. We'll give you a tractor station in the middle, and we'll service the tractor for you. Right? Now, you're not all going to be needed to work this farm. So what we encourage is maybe some of you might want to go into the city. Why don't you go into the city? And it's not said so much as a question and a would you like to. It's a go to the city. We need some people in those factories over there.
We need more workers in the city rather than on the farms.
And what is really driving their quest for people, the reason why people want to go into the city is one word: starvation. There's a great quote, I can't remember who it was by at the moment, but there's a quote that the collectivisation, period of collectivisation is the world's first man-made famine. And it really is. It doesn't go well on a human toll. However, what happens is, by forcing the farms to collectivise, he's doing something that all the other countries did through capitalism. So through capitalism was wages and pay and where the work was. People funneled naturally into the cities, and then the factories started and the boom started in the factories. Stalin is basically forcing it at this point. He's basically pushing everybody off the land into the factories. He's pushing everybody into the cities. The other thing is, too, he's just created his industry. Tractors. And Russia actually becomes the world's leading exporter of tractors during this period of time. So it's modernisation as well, because you've got the tractor, which is quite, the way they're building, they're quite modern. You've got an industry that is starting up. What also happens with this industry, though, is you then require things like, steel. You require then the coal industry to start picking up. So he's stimulating the economy through this sort of communist ideal of, well, we're going to just push everybody into the city now, and you people out here who are working on the farms, you are going to work at this rate. And he starts setting targets, and this is where we get to the 5-year plans.
5-year plans.
The 5-year plans are always seen as kind of the hallmark of Stalin policy. Would you agree with that one?
Yeah, I would. I don't even know why I sort of put an inflection on that. Yes, I would. I think this is what people traditionally sort of point out, say, that's communist, despite the fact that probably most governments set out things like a 5-year plan. It's the amount of government intervention that's probably the most astounding. But setting these plans off, you must, in this industry, produce this much. That's what a 5-year plan is. Setting levels of production, as well as other things. But the main thing is the government sets certain levels of production which you have to meet each year, and if you meet it, Stalin probably give you a medal. There was sort of propaganda campaigns to sort of celebrate workers who would give up their free time to come in and work for free just to meet or exceed their production levels.
Maybe a big award for the man who produced the most coal ever in a day.
Yes.
That is my favourite, because the accounts of that story are that, first of all, they fed him for like 3 days beforehand so he could keep working.
Yep.
Secondly, got everyone else out of his way. Thirdly, started counting other people's coal in his basket. So he's there tunneling away and getting all the coal, and there's other people just pouring coal into the basket.
Yeah.
So he produced the record amount, and he was awarded,
the Medal of Stalin,
the Medal of Stalin,
Russia, and then he's celebrated as this coal icon. There were no celebrities in Russia, primarily because they'd probably all been killed or purged. But if you became a worker who worked hard, you could too become a great person. That's sort of new ideology that's coming out. But then on the bigger level, so Stalin and his cronies, probably Stalin didn't even have much of a say. A crony would come in and say, we think that at optimal output, the steel producing industries could produce this many tons, and then this would have been probably Stalin's input. Double it. And so then the level that they had to produce was some unreasonable, fictitious level of output, which now the workers had to meet or face some very sort of scary prospects of being sent to the gulags, which are Siberian prisons, or being executed or purged. So these unreasonable levels of output are set by the government, and miraculously in the first couple of years they meet it, which just sort of goes to show the level of potential that was never really being met. So in the first couple of years they meet it, and so then the government just goes, well, we'll just increase it again and again and again, so that by the end of the 5 years, they've massively increased their production levels and output levels, but at the same time, it's just this sort of exponential curve which would eventually be unsustainable.
And what you end up getting, though, is the amount of production. So we'll quickly go through the amount of production. So, for example, oil production.
Yeah.
Right. In 1927 and 1928, we're talking about 11.7 million tonnes of oil produced. By 1937, that figure has gone through the roof.
Yep.
But by the time you get to 1937, you're dealing with, if you look at it, it's about 28.5 million tonnes of oil being produced. That's a massive jump. If you want a really big idea of the jump, by 1933, so in the middle there, it was 21.4.
Yeah, so it's doubled in the first 5-year plan.
Easily.
The thing, however, that they learn from it is in 32-33, the planned output level is 22.
Yeah.
And they reach 21.4. So they go, oh, okay, they're reaching that. Well, we've got to extend that carrot on that stick a little bit further away so they work harder. So then in 37, when they actually produced 28.5, the actual planned amount was 46.
Yep.
So they had no chance of meeting that. But by setting these astronomically high goals, you're really motivating your workers to put in more effort, but it's not the good kind of motivation.
The most important one for me is coal. Right, so coal was 35.4 million tonnes in 27-28. By 1933, that's 64.3 million, and that's a good output. By 1937, they're producing 128 million tonnes of coal.
So it's a 4 times increase.
So that is a massive, massive increase. Now, what we have to understand is that the first 5-year plan, though, the idea was they were going to have heavy industry and machine engineering that needed to start. So coal, power, all of those things. It did increase the state control, and this is where you start getting the food shortages, however. Now, they hit some of those targets. What they didn't hit was a lot of the food targets. Now, the reason why they don't hit the food targets is that while the industrialisation side of things was going quite well, the collectivisation side of things, not so well. First of all, the peasants who had, remember, everyone talks about the revolution about being the lower classes in Russia. It's a working class revolution. The peasants didn't factor into it because there was a belief from, like Trotsky, for example, we go back to Trotsky, that the peasants were not important because they weren't politically minded, they weren't politically motivated. So the peasants will do whatever we want the peasants to do. We won't worry about the peasants. What we will, however, worry about are the working classes. So the working classes are the ones who sort of drive the Communist Party forward in this period of time. Now, the idea of collectivisation is that the farms will produce the food for the peasantry, and then they will also produce all the food to satiate Russia. In effect, though, that requires a couple of things to take place. One of the first things that you actually need to happen when you get to the idea of collectivisation is that the peasants need to be willing to collectivise, and the peasants need to be willing to give up the only thing they own, which is land. And the only thing they've ever known, which is land, and especially when they sort of understand that a lot of them, they've only known land all their life. A lot of these people are going to be driven to the cities and are going to be pushed towards doing industrial work, doing factory work, doing things that they're not necessarily comfortable in. So you've got a peasantry that is only really ever farmed and been agricultural, who are going to be driven off their land as they see it and driven into the city to be industrialised. They're not a big fan of this. So the collectivisation wasn't universally popular. So they tried to collectivise. A lot of farmers went, not happening. The response from Stalin is the first round of what basically becomes known as the terror. He starts going out there and having people arrested as enemies of the state. He starts getting them locked up. He starts executions in some parts of the country. You then get the kulaks, which are these more wealthy peasants who were the ones who were realistically the good farmers. And the kulaks are going, hang on a minute, so what you're telling me is we're the ones who know what we're doing, but you want us to sort of give everyone else our good farming land, our cattle, our sheep, our pigs. That's not happening. So what Stalin does is uses Lenin and uses communist ideals and goes, the kulaks are a class. And he basically starts a class war with the kulaks. Now, the kulaks are not a class. They're a group in the peasantry, but they're not a class as such, and not a social class as such. And he starts a class war against the kulaks, which leads to the kulaks being executed and basically run off the farms. What is the downside, however, is that the kulaks, who are the farmers, know what the hell they're doing. So when they turn up to collectivise their farms, they slaughter all of their animals. They slaughter the cattle, they slaughter the pigs, the sheep. 25 to 30% of all animals are slaughtered rather than being collectivised. And a lot of the grains and the crops are destroyed rather than being collectivised. Now, if you're Stalin, you're not factoring in 30% of your animals being slaughtered. You're expecting everyone to go, yep, let's do it. So the peasant unrest is really strong at that time. And the last factor that impacts the targets in terms of food is 32 to 34. There's mass famine.
Yeah. So in the Ukraine is the point that a lot of people will look to under Stalin and go, well, you can't sort of excuse him because of this. So the Holodomor essentially is the extinction of some 2 to 4 million Ukrainians. Hard to get numbers because Russia.
Yeah, Robert Conquest argues around 7.
Yeah, it's
his final number.
Sort of all over the place. Either way, it's astronomical numbers. And what eventually sort of merges these harrowing stories, not unlike, say, the Armenian genocide under the Ottomans as well, where people are essentially just walking around starving, sort of drastic cases of things like cannibalism and sort of people just dying on the street, women and children as much as men. And this is, well, either because weather and growing conditions came at the same time to reduce output levels, or the vast majority of food was exported to the cities irrespective of what happened to the local population.
Yeah, the one of my favourite Robert Conquest quotes on this, I absolutely love this quote. Stalinism is one way of attaining industrialisation, just as cannibalism is one way of attaining a high-protein diet. And this is Stalin would argue, and did argue consistently, that it had to happen. It was necessary. And that was the Soviet historical view as well, and all the Soviet history books that were written talked about the fact that it was a necessary thing, and that Comrade Stalin had no choice but to industrialise the way that he did. Now, you could argue that is that higher human toll efficiency? Because one of the things that we're talking about is efficiency of the workforce, is losing that many people, efficiency of the workforce. Well, the grain figures, for example, don't go back to what they were before collectivisation until 35. That's the first time that the grain figures start to outstrip what they were doing before all of this. So that's, if you're looking at it there, you're looking at about 7 to 8 years of a massive dip in food production before you start getting back to where you were when you started the process of increasing food production. That makes it a bit of a difficult program, but the benefits to Russia.
They would have lost without it. There's a pretty good chance they would have lost World War II. And this is the difficulty talking about Stalin and Stalin Russia. He did so much bad, and he doesn't seem to have been motivated by evil itself. Though you could make an assessment that he was evil, especially on a basis like this. He's motivated by communist ideals, which don't dictate the terms of starvation for a nation. But what he achieves out of it is so essential in the bent of history that if he hadn't done it, there's a very good chance, Nazi Europe is a thing. But it's so hard to then say, so 7 million people deserve to die.
Well, I think
we can't reconcile ourselves.
Volkov, I think, is the one who argues that it's not actually about economic policy.
Yeah.
The 5-year plans are central control.
Yeah.
And the 5-year plans and the period of the 5-year plans of collectivization and industrialization is about Stalin establishing that he is the person in charge. And if you look at what he does with the workers and the peasants, the message gets through pretty quickly to the workers and the peasants that there is no challenging what happens on high. If word comes down from on high, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen.
Well, this is the formation of totalitarianism, which is essentially what happens to Russia. It turns into a totalitarian state where total control and total power are vested in a very small number of people, Stalin being the main person. And there's no aspect of people's lives which is free from scrutiny or a set of eyes watching you. The whole notion of Big Brother and 1984, this all comes from Stalin's Russia, wherein essentially your life is now controlled in its entirety by the government planners.
And I mean, an example of this is women. Yeah. And the role of women in Stalinist Russia, which, interestingly enough, the Communist Party had freed up a lot with regards to women.
Oh, they're the most... This is another point of irony. The Communist parties, even before 1917, the Communist parties around the world were probably the most progressive and liberal of all the sort of, not just political parties, but of ideologies out there.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, they set up their own, women's department for a start. They give women the right to work and go, you can go and work. You are open to that. They sort of promote sexual equality and sexual freedom of women and stop
abortion is allowed.
They stop the idea of you are answerable to a man for your sexual freedom. You do what you want.
We celebrate under Whitlam in the 70s no fault divorce.
Yeah.
That was a communist principle in the 1890s. That
Stalin uses it.
Yeah, that's it. And it's one of those difficult things to reconcile, that some people's lives are improving at the same time as people are just being wholesale slaughtered as well.
Yeah, and the idea was that, for example, like the Bolshevik Party and then the communists, when they take control, push the idea of, the woman does not work at home. In fact, we're going to set up the communal dining areas and the communal childcare facilities and all of these things are designed to make your life as easy as humanly possible at home. You are not there to work at home. We want you to be working for the state. We don't need you to be slaving away at home on those sorts of things. Now, Stalin abolishes most of this. Yeah. The women's department goes in 1930, straight away. Marriage becomes the sanctimonious hub of all of Russian society again. The male is in charge. It is a male-dominated, find me a female member of Stalin's, a high-profile, high-ranking, important member of Stalin's party. You can't. The women were, rather than encouraged to work, it became an obligation. You had to work. And this included things like where they'd have basically a pen in the corner of the farms on collectivization, where the women would bring their children to be breastfed.
With the sheep?
Yeah, basically so that there'd be a pen at the front of the corner of the farm and you'd drop your child off at the pen and a nurse would look after them and breastfeed them and take care of them and you'd be sent out to the field to go work for a while. And those dining rooms, for example, the communal dining rooms are basically, except for where they need to economically, they're all abolished. He gets rid of all of this, and most women basically have to now go back and look after the family, as well as now carry the burden of, and you must meet your quota. Because there's no changing quota for men and women here. It's the quota is the same. You must meet your targets, or else. So things like if you were a housewife that wasn't working, you didn't get a ration card. So basically there was starvation of women who were looking after a household or a family instead. So you had to do both. You didn't get a say. And that became horrific. And that's one of the areas, again, when you look at the human toll of the policies. If you look at it from a totalitarian point of view, when you look at it from a total view of Russia and what it means for the war in particular, the industrialisation process is what makes them a power going into World War II. And it makes them a modernised nation. But look at the human toll and look at the role of women, for example. It's brutal.
Yeah, it's not... I think an argument could be made that Stalin stops being a communist or a Marxist in the early 30s, given his unwinding of all of the actual progress that had been made with the Leninist approach to reforming Russia. I mean, that's an argument for people far more qualified than us to argue how communist was Stalin. I mean, we just have to look at the basic historical evidence and go, well, there was progress and then progress was undone, but then at the same time some other progress. For example, everyone has access to a free healthcare, which, depending on where you're listening to, is either an amazing thing or just like, yeah, so. But in Russia, from a country which had no healthcare system at all in 1917 to now all of a sudden everyone can get free healthcare. I mean, that's an amazing progress. But we always come back to the Stalin question. Could any of this have been achieved in a much more humane way? Was the violence necessary to do this? And
the complete disruption.
Cost versus benefit. Yeah, complete disruption.
Because, I mean, there's things like, for example, the NKVD, the secret police, start going around to make sure the targets are being reached.
Yeah.
Rather than admit that a target wasn't reached, people just started falsifying the paperwork.
Yeah.
And look, we've got it, we've reached our target. So that meant they weren't hitting targets, but they thought they were. So they were having massive issues in terms of how much they had. We're about to get into Stalin's purges and the show trials. We'll get into those in a minute. But the Great Purge, for example, in the mid-1930s, wipes out basically every specialist that he had.
Yeah.
He just basically kills them all. And that ruins a large chunk of his economy as well. And there's a quote attributed to one communist leader who referred to Russia as the nomadic gypsy camp. And the historian Moshe Lewin refers to it as a quicksand society. And I think both of those are fairly accurate in terms of, nobody had any permanency, nobody had any sort of... This settled society that Stalin is promoting around the time of Trotsky doesn't really exist.
No.
It's selling the ideal without it actually being what he said it was. So
one thing that comes into my mind, by the mid-30s, to either side of Russia, you've got the rise of Hitler, you've got the complete and utter rise of Hideki Tojo and Japan, and Mussolini's risen in Italy, Franco in Spain, and I think if he's not at least learning lessons from these people as this is how to rule a country, at the very least, Stalin sees the rise of fascism as an imminent threat to Russia, and this is something that probably gets pushed aside because it's saying something semi-positive about Stalin here, but he does have some peculiar political foresight where he can sort of see things fomenting on the horizon and going, this could be a problem sooner or later, and starting to take action before it absolutely needs to. There's only sort of one time, I think, in history where he gets caught with his pants down, and that's when Hitler turns around and invades, and he was an idiot to sort of think that, but I'm getting ahead to 41 there. But at this time, by the mid-30s, he can see that you need a strong central government, especially if all these other hostile nations are planning something against you. And so he's bent towards totalitarianism. He's bent towards purges and sort of exiling and restructuring society away from communism towards Stalinism. I think this is where he's got a bit of motivation which seems semi-justified in the very loosest sense of that word.
And I mean the start of the terror, and the terror takes a few different turns here. There are elements of it, first of all, like the rewriting of history. So, for example, and there's a couple of great books about this where they show you the photos where anyone who became an enemy of Stalin over time, and therefore an enemy of the state, in early photos are wiped out. There's a very famous one of walking along the banks of the river, the Volga, and there's a couple of people there with Stalin, one of whom was head of the labour force, who was then executed about 3 years after that. In the retouched up photo, he's not there. There's a great photo of Lenin and Trotsky and Kamenev, and they're all there with a group of workers, and suddenly there's this really elongated gap, which is where Trotsky and Kamenev were, right next to Lenin. There's a gap. They no longer exist. There's a great one of Lenin giving a speech and Trotsky's just standing at the base of the podium.
And then he's a wall.
Yeah, he's a wall. He vanishes. It's early Photoshop, like really early Photoshop.
Yeah.
They literally erased you from photos. The history books were all rewritten to talk about Stalin's prominent role and him to take credit in things that other people did. He takes the credit for it.
And then in school books, there's if you ever sort of fell out of favour and were disgraced and purged, the teachers would have to go in and glue pieces of paper over the photos of the recently purged people and over the text extracts that said something good. And so by probably about 1939, a student's textbook would maybe have 3 words in it and 2 pictures. Stalin is great, and then 2 pictures of Stalin.
Imagine doing your exams. Like what you started learning at the start of the course is not the same 3 weeks into the course.
Yeah, I hope
and by the end of the course, none of the people exist.
And you were probably going to be sent to jail for saying something good about someone who, in the interim between you writing and being marked, was probably purged.
You put your hand on and go, but what about Kamenev? And you're never heard from again. So why did he do it? Why the terror? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, he had to keep people sort of looking out for what he was going to do next. You can't let anyone get stable. So it sort of creates this sort of jumpy nature around the party, which is not good for the party, but is great for Stalin. He also needed to get rid of everybody who thought that his policies sucked. And a lot of people were enemies of collectivization and didn't agree with it and thought there were better ways. Those people needed to go. He also didn't like the idea of the comparisons with Lenin and Trotsky because, we said that he wasn't completely bereft of idealism and ideology, but compared to those two, he's a bit of a lightweight.
Yeah.
And he can't be seen as being a lightweight in anything. So the first time he does it really, and before we all talk about this relating to, but Lenin and Trotsky wouldn't have... No. Lenin complained when he got back to the Soviet Union, when he got back to Russia just in time for the revolution, and the Bolsheviks were having their revolution, they outlined their view, and one of the things they said as a party was no executions. And Lenin hit the roof when he got back and yelled, and apparently it's been transcribed, yelled at them, how can we have a revolution if I can't execute anybody? Right? One of the greatest tantrums, I think, ever thrown by a political leader.
Legitimate as well.
How can I do this if you won't let me kill anybody? He was big on that. And again, Trotsky set up the Red Army. You don't think Trotsky undertook all this as well? You better believe he did. But Stalin needs to reinforce the 5-year plan. So the 5-year plan, he starts it off 28. Some of the equipment wasn't working properly. Some of the farming practices weren't going very well.
Someone.
The Shakti trials happened, and he basically, everyone who was involved in the engineering is put on trial and either executed or sent to Siberia.
Enemy of the state. As
an enemy of the state because they sabotaged everything. They were sabotaged. The work, it was all sabotage. Nothing failed. It wouldn't have failed if it wasn't for the sabotage. You start to see people within the Communist Party start to not question him.
No.
But you start to hear murmurs of there are people in the party who aren't really happy. And And they had purged people before because, they had a massive intake of people under Lenin with Stalin overseeing it. But then they decided there were too many low-class people in the party and they need to get rid of some of them.
Sort this out.
So the Shitsky happens. We all like calling it the Shitsky because it was a bit Shitsky for everyone who was purged. You were basically asked to hand your party card in.
Yeah.
And we'll issue you with a new card. And then you were never issued with a new card.
You want to see a good example of a show trial or a purge? It's not Stalin. Just go on YouTube and look up Saddam Hussein's show trials.
Yep.
One time he was doing it and it was recorded on video, I think by accident.
Yep.
Or it came out by accident. I can't quite remember it. But it's astounding because Saddam Hussein is just sitting up on the front stage, as Stalin would have been in the 30s, and he's got this list of accusations. The following people have been accused of blah, 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 blah. They are hereby sentenced to death. And he starts reading out the names. And you stood up and you said, I'm guilty, or, this is thankful reprieve. Thank you for correcting my life. You literally walked out of the auditorium, as is shown in the video, and then off to the side of the auditorium. What happens? You're shot.
And
that's it.
Well, another example of that is actually the Ceausescu's.
Yeah.
And again, we think about this with regards to dictators carrying this out, or totalitarian leaders, but this is where the Ceausescu's were overthrown in Romania, and the military conducts its own show trial. They recorded it again, and they read out a list of charges, and Ceausescu goes, I don't recognise this court, and they went, too bad, you're guilty, stood him up, walked him and his wife outside and shot them in the courtyard.
Cool.
Like literally stand them up, walk them out, shoot them. That was it. That was the problem the West had with the end of Romania. They're like, when we want the Ceausescu's, and they went, bit of a problem. Yeah. They're laying down over there. Can we wake them up? No, we really
Similar
can't.
sort of things happen in Germany at the same time with the Spartacus and the Free Corps, where Luxembourg and Liebknecht are both just sort of bundled into a car by the Free Corps, who are these ex-military right-wingers. Bundled into a car, taken out to some sort of remote bridge and just shot and left on the side of the road. So the wholesale violence and lack of due process is just the norm in post-war world, except for, say, Britain, France and the United States.
And what you start getting, though, is you start getting, first of all, the wiping out of other people. It's like sending the message, okay. But then he starts purging the party.
Yeah.
And the party is where you really start seeing the effect. The effect of the show trials is probably at its absolute zenith when you deal with what he does and who he takes out, more importantly. So before the show trials, you get Rutin, who's a party secretary, who circulated a 200-page document in 1932 where he's critical of Stalin, where he refers to him as the evil genius of the Russian Revolution, says there's a personal dictatorship. Others start talking about the idea of he's ruining the trade unions. He wants to have them killed. Mm-hmm. And the Politburo says no. So that is really interesting. Like, up until about 1934, the Politburo still has the ability to go, you can't kill them.
Yeah, no, it can't do
And
that.
he doesn't kill them. However, after the Congress of Victors, it starts to change. So the Congress of Victors is in February of 1934. And once he's done that, he basically says, I'm going to continue my industrialisation, I'm going to keep working with it, and members of the party put forward Sergei Kirov. Now, Kirov has been a very close ally of Stalin all the way through, but he did not agree with the policy of collectivisation and industrialisation. He was a very, very popular member of the party. Mm-hmm. When they put Stalin's position up, as they did at every Congress, I think it was something like 100-something members voted for Kirov.
Not good.
Now, if I'm Kirov, I'm panicking.
Yeah. Guys,
because this doesn't end well. So what they did was they actually got rid of the idea of the title of General Secretary. And Kirov and Stalin are sort of put into the same position. Like, Stalin's still sort of senior, but they're basically seen as being the same. And Stalin welcomes this change and welcomes Comrade Kirov into the party. And then Kirov is shot on the street. Now, Stalin's response to this is he is bereft. He is just grief-stricken. He is mourning the loss of Comrade Kirov. He is sobbing uncontrollably. He is talking about what a horrible loss for the party it is. The belief is that Stalin had him shot. It seemed to be a Stalin execution. The man who was arrested for the crime says, no, there was no conspiracy. I did this completely on my own. Before he's even asked if there was a conspiracy. That seems a bit suspect.
Oh, there's plenty of dodginess. So the guy who does the killing, Nikolaev.
Yes.
The day before he does the assassination, the secret police meet him out the front, off the building, and they find on him a revolver and a secret plan, and rather than arresting him, let him go.
Yep.
Then, the day off the assassination, Kirov's own bodyguard is MIA for the day, and then miraculously turns up dead the day after.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah, it's all just coincidental.
I can't believe, the Stalin must have been shocked.
He would have been shocked and heartbroken.
He was so shocked and heartbroken that he decides he's going to get to the bottom of this.
Oh, yes.
So what he decides to do is it's time to go through and deal with what he refers to as the Trotskyites. So he goes after the Trotskyites within the party. Now, what this means is he can't put Trotsky on trial because he's not there, although he does, and he finds him guilty in absentia, which is lovely. But in 1936, he gets 14 people plus, more importantly, out of this, Zinoviev and Kamenev, and he brings them forward. They're told that they are responsible for the plotting of the murder of Kirov, and they are also responsible for organising terrorist organisations within the Soviet Union. Their families are threatened. They are tortured. Members of their families are tortured. They are told two things. First of all, we will continue to torture you and your family unless you admit your guilt. Secondly, they are told that we understand this is all Comrade Trotsky. He did this. We understand it is his influence. If you admit that you did this under the influence of Comrade Trotsky, you will be safe. Your family will be safe. Everybody will be safe. So they stand up and they, one after the other, admit, yes, I am guilty of this. I have been misled by Comrade Trotsky. Comrade Trotsky is responsible. I did not mean any harm, and I'm deeply apologetic. And yes, I accept whatever you decide to do to me. And Stalin's response is, thank you, death.
Yeah, executed.
And everybody is shot, and all of their property is taken away from them and given to Stalin and the party to use as they see fit. So there were thousands of people identified as enemies of the state, but the idea of doing that was to send the message.
Essentially, through all of this, the original Politburo that Stalin had come up through was removed completely from reality. As you say, Zimenev is gone, Kamenev's gone, later on Bukharin, Rykov are gone, Trotsky's gone. He's the last one standing, and so consequently, anyone who knows the skeletons in Stalin's closet or could potentially pose a threat later on, they're completely removed.
So the NKVD goes back to work, and in January of 37 you get the second of the show trials. In the second of the show trials, it's Radek and 16 other members of the Central Committee who are put forward. They're all said that they are guilty of treason. They want to divide the USSR between Japan and Germany, espionage, sabotage, terrorism, and being Trotskyites, which is now a crime.
That's the worst crime out of all of them.
Now, they all confess, even though some of them try to protest a little bit. 13 executions, Radek and 3 others are imprisoned for 10 years. So the NKVD is doing their work. However, Stalin goes, you're not working hard enough. And Yagoda, who is the head of the NKVD, is promptly arrested for not finding enough. Maybe you're harbouring them, maybe you are one. And now by the third trial, he's given up all pretense. They are literally just charged with being Trotsky supporters. That's basically what it is. It's terrorism and anti-state sentiment. In other words, you're a Trotskyite. He basically says you're all Trotskyites. This is Bukharin. This is the guy who's in charge of his propaganda. This is Rykov. This is Yagoda. This is 18 other members, and we're not talking minor members. We're talking about the head of the labour force. We're talking about the head of industrial policy. All of these people are just loaded up.
Just to sort of labour the point of how absurd it's become, I just want to read out this extract from one of the accused in the 38 trials. It starts, I must also say that in 1932 we took measures to spread plague among pigs, which resulted in a high pig mortality. Further, as regards horse breeding, in 1936 we caused a wide outbreak of anemia in Belarus. This was done intentionally because in Belarus horses are extremely important for defence purposes. We endeavoured to undermine this powerful base in case it should ever be needed in connection with war. That's someone standing up in the show trial and saying, yep, I'm guilty, and I'm guilty of giving plague to pigs and killing horses. Because I could see that would bring about the fall of Russia.
And they were handed their scripts. Yeah. So it was after the Kirov thing is where he passes the law where he says, first of all, the NKVD has to execute any prisoner found guilty immediately. Basically, it's so they can get rid of the enemy within. The other reason, of course, being so they can't then later on manage to prove they didn't do it. Secondly, and far more importantly, it became a crime to associate with anyone who is an enemy of the state. So what that meant was if you were a family member of this person, if they were found guilty of being an enemy of the state, you were all guilty. Yeah. Because you had been associated. With it. Now, there was an account of a show trial, and there's a couple of really brutal things that took place. There was a case where a man was required to make a public confession of treason and was told his small son would have his head crushed in. The man apparently didn't believe this, so they picked his son up by his feet. His son was picked up by his feet, and they then shattered his head against the nearest wall. Right, this is the sort of torture and horrendous things that were being done. The other one is the telegram from Yezhov to the NKVD. You are charged with the task of exterminating 10,000 enemies of the people. Report results by signal. And the reply was, in reply to yours, the following enemies have been shot. And a list of people.
It's 10,000 people.
So literally, just pick 10,000 people. Any 10,000 people that you want to pick. Just pick them and just go and have them shot for us. That would be great.
This is a real reign of terror. It's rule by fear by this point, without any doubt. And so if you heard someone denouncing Stalin or saying bad about Stalin, you could denounce them, and you should denounce them as Trotskyists to your local NKVD.
Did you meet your quota?
Because
did you meet your quota?
If you don't, and it's found out that you don't, you're now complicit in that criticism of Stalin, and you yourself will be executed as well.
And again, things like the chief prosecutor of Stalin, chief prosecutor and judge, who would write up the prosecution and write up the sentence before the trial had started, so he could just give it out to them at the end of it. He already had it written before the trial. Yezhov, who was the brutal head of the NKVD at the end, basically, he was the one who starts the quota system. He was the one who really, basically, if he knew there was a feud between anybody within the party, he'd get one of them to confess that the other one had committed a crime, so he could just have people killed. In the final years of what Yezhov did, this is who he killed. All 11 war commissars, 3 of the 5 marshals of the USSR, including Chief of General Staff and the Civil War hero Tukhachevsky.
Yeah, these are serious problems for World War I.
All of the admirals and all of their replacements. He killed all but one of the Air Force commanders. 35,000 officers were also arrested and shot. This is in the run-up to World War II.
Yeah.
The total number of deaths at this point, this is not including the Great Famine, this is just the terror, estimated by someone like a Robert Conquest at about 13 million people. Officials. There's a great chart I've seen where it's all of the members of the party at the revolution, so 1917. And if you go down the list, there were about 6 of them left. There were 134 people on the chart. 6 of them made it through the war and got to the end of World War II. So if you want to know why maybe Russia struggled at the start of the World War, maybe killing all of your military leaders, not a good policy. Just suggesting it. So maybe if I was going to war, I wouldn't want to kill all my generals.
Yeah. Unless Stalin had the great foresight to just clear the path for Zhukov.
That's exactly what he was doing.
Yeah,
he wanted Zhukov to have a clear run. So we'll finish up sort of just quickly talking about going to World War II, because I think that's important.
I think that's important, but also warrants its own episode.
Yeah, so we'll do a little bit more on Stalin and World War II as its own episode a bit later. But just to sort of finish up, so we talked about Stalin as a pragmatist. I think the lead up to World War II is his most pragmatic.
Yeah.
Of obviously Hitler has come to power within Germany, and you've got the rise of fascism with Mussolini as well. We mentioned Tojo and stuff like that in Japan. You've got a militarised Japan on Russia's border again, which that's going to be filling them with great joy.
And not just a water border, like they're literally in China.
Yeah, they're in Manchuria.
They're in Mongolia. They're able to walk into Russia if they want.
Manchuria has now got is now Manchukuo. You've got Japanese territory.
Oh, and the emperor's back.
Yep, it's all happening. So he sees that on one border. He understands that Hitler is starting to make moves on his eastern border, on his western border, sorry. And he knows that Hitler's moving on the western border of the Soviet Union. He still would like Poland. We gave that up, but he'd really like it back again.
Finland as well.
Yeah, and he wants his buffer back, and he wants his territory back. Now, he doesn't start going to Hitler.
No.
In fact, he really wants everyone else to deal with Hitler.
He knows he's not in a position to do it himself.
Yeah. He knows that he can't. And again, why? Well, he just murdered 3/4 of his military. It's a bit hard.
But what worked last time was a two-front, multi-allied approach against Germany.
And so what he basically starts proposing to people is, hey, remember what happened last time when they were worried about two fronts? Hey, we can be your second front.
Yeah, start shopping around Russia as an ally again.
And the West is not particularly interested. The British are not particularly interested. America doesn't care about anybody at this point in time.
No, they're so isolationist.
Britain is like, no, we can fix this. Because Chamberlain is appeasing him. France is just going, look, we don't care at the moment. We've got Germans near our borders. We're a bit worried.
They're also communists, and we still have a problem with that.
Yeah, exactly. France had the big problem with communism. Britain is still going, oh yes, you're dirty communists as well.
Yeah, filthy.
So Stalin doesn't want to necessarily go to Hitler because they are absolute mortal enemies.
Oh, Hitler's risen to power, promising to kill communists.
Yeah, exactly. That's how he's got there. That's who he blamed. Remember, when the Reichstag burns down, it's a communist that did it.
It's the Jews and the socialists that are the problem to Hitler.
Yep. So he looks at the situation and sort of goes, well, he's going to invade me. The only way I can stop him from invading me is if I form an alliance where I guarantee him that we will not attack.
Yeah.
And that basically what we're doing, and what both sides, and I think both sides understood it, what this treaty is not a we like each other treaty. This treaty is we're buying time. This is going to happen. We just don't know when.
Yeah.
Right? So Stalin sees it as buying time to allow industrialisation to take off a bit more. And he sees it as giving him a bit of a buffer. And again, when they then have the Axis Treaty with Japan, both of his borders are now surrounded by friends. So he looks at it and goes, okay.
Yeah.
I've managed to... In a way, Russia is able to be sort of isolationist. They're not really that heavily involved early on because he's done this deal with Hitler to basically say, well, we won't attack you. I guarantee you we won't attack you. All we want is Poland.
Yeah.
Give me Poland and don't question anything about Finland and we're sweet. And Hitler is more than happy to take this on. He's got his own stuff to deal with.
Yeah, they're both pragmatic in the sense that they know that if they go to war, it's not going to end well for anyone. If they can neutralise each other, then all the better for it. And so consequently, Stalin, the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, which guarantees Russia and Germany won't come to blows, and then also the Neutrality Act with Japan is so pragmatic for Stalin, but so bad for the Western Allies, because now that Russia's neutralised itself, when war does break out, Russia goes, well, you didn't want me before, now you want me? No, I've secured my future. I don't need you guys. You turned your nose up at me before, so see you later. You can deal with this problem now. I tried to give you a way out, and you all rejected me, so good luck.
And the argument can be made that I don't know if there are many other members of the Politburo or many other members of the party who would have done the deals that Stalin did leading into World War II. You could argue that so many of them were so based in ideology that there would have been absolutely no axis formed with Germany.
Oh, certainly, if the Trotskyists or the Mensheviks or the permanent revolutionaries had taken over as opposed to Stalin, there's no chance they would have signed on with capitalist fascist nations to come to any sort of agreement. They would have been working at undermining those nations and trying to get a communist revolution, which would have brought an invasion on earlier rather than later.
So I think that in many ways, the fact that it was Stalin there is what allows Russia to sort of prepare themselves better for war. Although, as you pointed out, one of the rare moments that Stalin is not really, is asleep at the wheel, is by trusting that alliance, and trusting that
longer
Hitler
than
was,
it should have been trusted.
and trusting that Hitler was not going to invade, even when information started coming through to go, look, he's gathering forces on the border. Should we worry about this? No, he's not going to. He's busy with Britain. He's He's worried about Britain. And I think that's one of the only times you can sort of argue that. But the foreign policy leading up to this point had basically been make friends with everyone, be nice with everyone, don't really trust any of them because they're all capitalist dogs who will come and kill us in our beds.
Don't rock the boat.
But we just keep quiet. Look, he wants to yell in the middle of Europe, let him yell. If Hitler wants to scream, let him scream. Just stay out of it. And it's only when events sort of drag them into it and it becomes opportune that he ends up sort of forming the alliance with Hitler. But again, that's purely, I would argue, on the basis of I just need to be prepared. I'm not ready yet. Remember, most of their tanks and most of their aircraft, they had a lot of them, but they were World War I relics.
Yeah, they're not building it yet.
And again, they lose, I think it's some ridiculous percentage of their air force in the first week of the war when the Germans invade.
Yeah.
They lose a huge percentage of their military in the first 2 weeks.
Stalin just has a complete and utter mental breakdown and is incapable of leading Russia for the first 2 to 3 weeks of this. Once he finds out Hitler's invaded, he just stops being a normal person and just starts becoming a babbling buffoon, and it's up to the less experienced, less knowledgeable experts around him, and I use experts with quotation marks around it, to try and pick up the slack, which is where all the roosters come home to roost.
And with the roosters coming home to roost, we'll leave that one there because I think we're going to get another episode out of Stalin and war. Because War Stalin is a fascinating Stalin. War Stalin is the great Stalin of them all.
This is the Stalin everyone thinks of.
Yeah, that's the Stalin that everyone thinks of. That's when it's after this period that the cult of personality just kicks into an absolute ridiculous level gear because now he has been victorious in the Great Patriotic War. And we'll leave you with the idea of the Great Patriotic War. So check us out on all of our forms of media, obviously on Facebook and Twitter. Also, keep checking us out on Libsyn, on Spotify. Thank you for those listening on Spotify, on iTunes, and of course, YouTube. We are on the YouTubes, and we will be putting some video stuff up there, hopefully in the not too distant future, although we're not going to give you time frames because, well, we don't really hold to those very well.
We look backwards at time, not forwards at time.
Look, time is a construct.
Time is a construct.
Time is a construct. All right, so anyway, I'm still Chris. This is still Thomas with me.
Goodbye.
And we'll catch you on the flip side.